Welcome. Today is Saturday. We are in the weekend and we are talking about another spec in the beta of Midnight to see how it's doing. And today we're talking about Balanced Druid. So we're going to be looking at what has been changing in their talent trees, what has been added and what has been pruned away from Balanced Druid. What are the apex talents and how has the spec been looking in terms of rotation, in terms of buttons available to it to play your spec in single target, in AoE, for both of your builds, if you have two different builds to play in the Raid and in Mythic Plus. Now, starting with the absolute biggest, largest change is your Mastery. Basically, you have lost the extra addition of you do extra damage to targets affected by Sunfire and then extra damage to targets affected by Moonfire. This was the annoying problem of balancing both the Raid and Mythic Plus, because as a Balanced Druid in Mythic Plus, you had to spread all of these dots to all of the targets to manage to get max value from your Mastery. Obviously, this wasn't that big of an issue in single target, because it's just one target to dot. You were always gaining max value from your Mastery, but in Mythic Plus, you will get a bit harder to balance, so a lot of your damage was becoming conditional on whether or not you were able to effectively spread these two dots to as many targets as you could. Now they are being made not as relevant for the rest of your damage, for the rest of your Mastery scaling damage. The second bigger one is that right now, you are used, if you are doing single target, to start your double Starfire to enter your Solar Eclipse, right? The major change is that while this is very sort of passive, right? It goes on by itself. Once you have your weak auras telling you have like 1 second left on Eclipse, you precast Starfire once and twice to immediately enter Eclipse again. It's just very passive. You don't really have to work around this buff. Now you have, because Eclipse is now a cooldown. Now you have 2 charges of it, but still it lasts for 15 seconds and has a 30-second cooldown. So you can't just, enter Eclipse and then do your basic stuff, just do your rotation, click your buttons, and then when you have the bar telling you that Eclipse is ending, you're like, oh, I guess Eclipse is ending, let me just pop Eclipse again. And then you enter Eclipse again and you keep doing it, because then Eclipse will be on cooldown. You can't actually just re-enter Eclipse whenever you want. So this is equally good and bad. It's good for players who wanted more complexity. It's good for players who wanted to feel rewarded, for example, for being able to properly time Eclipse around your damage windows. And it's bad, obviously, for players who were perfectly fine having a passive background, self-sufficient and self-working Eclipse. Because now you can't do that. You can't just mindlessly spam Eclipse whenever it's up, which means that now you're gonna have to time Eclipse whenever you have, max or close to max astral power. You have to start getting way more into being able to pool your astral power, so that once you have pooled your astral power, you can enter Eclipse immediately and then dump all of your astral power inside of Eclipse, and then you do your normal rotation. And at this point is when you have to think when to use Eclipse next, right? There is only 3 seconds left. Do I do back-to-back Eclipse? Is there 15 seconds left on my Celestial Alignment, on my Convoke, on my Treants? Do I have to delay the Eclipse? Do I have to use it now? That's something you have to start thinking about in Midnight, because now it is a cooldown and not something you can spam whenever you want. That is the major change of the entire spec coming in Midnight, which is why I said it can either be seen as very good or very bad, depending on whether or not you wanted more complexity around the spec or not. Now, as for the build itself, you can see here all of our damage buttons. Let's not cheat. Let's get rid of these. Those are your damage buttons right now. Now, if you were to switch into an AoE build, you're going to be losing 1 button, because obviously your Convoke is... technically you can keep your Convoke in Unit Chosen. It's just that it's not currently being used. You just switch from Celestial Alignment to Incarnation, and then you simply replace Force of Nature with your Fury of Elune. Now, the major change when it comes to cooldowns is the quartet of talents that you're losing around here. These were all pretty much self-sufficient. You had Humble Embrace, Humble Inspiration, Waning Twilight, and Astral Smolder. So you would be, for example, in Mythic Plus, spamming Starfire. Starfire procs its increased damage. When you do consume that buff, you gain more dot damage. And as you were consuming these buffs from Starfire, Starfire was also creating a dot, and the dot would be your third dot on the target. Moonfire, Sunfire, and now this Astral Smolder dot. So with 3 dots active on the target, you would also gain 6% more damage. This entire cycle of talents was sort of working off of itself. Now it's kind of gone. You're left with one of the 4, Umbral Embrace only, and nothing else, no other follow-up, which makes this much weaker. You have lost the other 3. You have gained a couple of extra QOLs in Mythic Plus, so you have the option for starters to make your Starfall twice as fast. You lose the dot extension, which is still here, and it makes it easier now to have a nice and easy AoE line of talents, because now Meteorites is here. Instead of Astronomical Impact, now you have Meteorites for AoE, so this becomes an easy triple AoE talent to pick when you go in Mythic Plus for starters. The rest of the talents haven't really changed much besides the pruning. Pruning, which includes the loss of Warrior of Elune and the loss of Stellar Flare. So Stellar Flare wasn't really being taken practically almost ever. You had this mythical scenario where you were fighting a council fight on like 3 bosses and you could use this button, but really it was never being taken. And then Warrior of Elune was taken only in 1 hero talent. It was taken in Elune's Chosen only. So those are the only buttons you are losing. The rest of the talents have not really been changed massively, besides the AoE line down the right and the quartet of talents we mentioned being lost. You do have more or less the same setup as you switch to AoE. You take the 3 AoE talents, you go down the Fury of Elune line, and you switch to Incarnation. That's really all it changes between Keeper of the Grove and Single Target and Elune's Chosen in AoE in Mythic Plus. Now, you do still keep the problems you have between Elune's Chosen and Keeper. The fact that Keeper still focuses around these 3 ends, which just feels bad. Really, all of this is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is that when you pop them, you do 24% more damage. That's it. That's the entire value. You do gain 12% haste. Sure, you do get a much weaker version of your tier set in Midnight, the spawning of the Dryad. I'm saying much weaker because you lose the part where you store the damage and then you blow up the damage with your Star Surges. What, for example, you use to cast back-to-back Celestial Alignments to make this tier set work. Now it's gone. In Midnight, it's just a Dryad spawning and nothing else. And just the entire theme around Force of Nature is still here in Midnight, which is bad. And the problem with Elune's Chosen is still here. You still just spam Starfire. You don't really play with anything else. And especially in single target, it makes it much harder to play because Starfire is quite slow, quite the clunky spell to use when it comes to raiding. If you're expecting to move a lot, it makes it much harder to play Elune's Chosen in the raid. You're not really gaining anything special from the new line of hero talents either. So neither of these are particularly good right now in terms of themes for your balanced druid. Now, as we said, the biggest change when playing this spec, especially if you want to stay in single target, is now thinking about your Eclipse. Because in Mythic Plus, you sort of get crutches because the Mythic Plus crutch is pulling a new pack. And later on, it's going to be, when you know the dungeon, when you know the route, it's going to be pulling the big pack. So that's sort of when you get the hint on when it's time to use your Eclipse, when it fits to use your Eclipse, right? In the raid, it's going to be, a tiny bit harder, I guess, because you don't exactly get told at all times when it's a good time to use your Eclipse, and you have to start thinking about when it is a good moment. You can still follow the normal teachings, I guess, of using your treants and your CA, dumping all of your astral power, all of it, before being able to use Convoke, right? This is all easy when you do it initially, immediately on pull, but then once all of this ends is when you're starting to think, okay, is it time to use Eclipse? And then once this Eclipse ends, what do we do? Do we use another charge of CA? Early on pull in a raid is going to be easier because you have all of these charges, right? You are sort of swarmed with all of these charges of your Eclipse, so it feels good because it feels like you are constantly in Eclipse easily. You don't, let's just say, worry too much about maintaining all of these charges. It's when you have gone about 90 or so seconds through your rotation in the raid when these charges are starting to fall off, where you have to start to think properly about when to line up all of these things. Like Eclipse now is ending, let's stack up in Assault Power, use Eclipse, drop the Treants, right? But at this moment, no more charges of CA, no more charges of Eclipse. That's when it gets, it's gonna get to feel worse compared to where you are now. Because right now, in live, you're out, one Starfire, other Starfire, back in Eclipse, right? Meanwhile, in the new version, you just won't be able to do it. So as I said, it can feel good if you like doing things like this. Let's imagine our wild mushrooms are gonna be our new Eclipse. You're like, okay, I got to use this on pool and then 2 minutes in, and then I can use CA on pool, and once CA ends, I can extend my CA, my Eclipse with a normal Eclipse, and then I can CA again, and then I can use Eclipse again, and then my first charge of CA is gonna be back for my Convoke, and then once CA ends, I can use my Eclipse here. But you have to time these things. You can't just use them randomly. Some players like doing this. They like feeling like they timed everything nicely and everything is flowing smoothly. Others don't, because it is just too complex. Especially now in the new Midnight with no add-ons, no timers, you won't be able to have a note telling you any of this, by the way. So some players might just not like doing this. They just feel like it's more complex than necessary. Besides this, yeah, there is still the feeling that you're entering and exiting Eclipse, and even entering CA is not powerful enough. It's like you're missing a peak moment. You're missing something here that unloads a ton of damage. Even when you play Elune's Chosen, when you do have the extra of your Fury of Elune laser beam, it still feels like you're missing something. When you do press Eclipse, you do see a whole bunch of stuff here, right? If I click Eclipse now, look at this, look at the amount of stuff you get. You get the Dryad, right, from your hero talent, you get the haste, you get the Solstice proc, you have the every other one of your Eclipse get the free Fury of Elune. A lot of this is just very, very minor. It's not that powerful whenever you proc this. There's the free Fury of Elune, your Balance of All Things crit, the Dryad, the haste, but it's not that strong for something that is supposed to be a cooldown, right? You would think you wanted some kind of payoff at the end of Eclipse, or maybe store the power, store the damage you did, so that your next Eclipse is stronger. You know, some kind of feel good moment when you are inside these damage windows, which right now you don't have, because right now it just feels like you took a mandatory permanent buff you used to have, which is Eclipse, and you turned it into a button that you have to think about. Okay. However, the thing you turned into a button, so it's harder to manage because it's not passive, you actually have to now think when you want to click this and gain all of these things, it's not stronger. It's not stronger than the older Eclipse you used to have. But the older Eclipse you used to have was simpler to use. It was passive, it was easy to manage. This one is harder to manage, but doesn't have any extra major payoffs. Now that we have a shaman here, for example, the good comparison would be with Cloudburst, right? Changing from Healing Stream Totem, which is this passive, brain-dead, always active talent, to Cloudburst. Obviously, the payoff with Cloudburst is that if you drop it in a good moment, you can heal a bunch, and then you can reactivate Cloudburst for a big bunch of healing. That's what makes it feel good. Balance changes the passive Eclipse to an active Eclipse, but you don't have... doesn't feel like, at least, you do have that big of a better payoff compared to what you used to have when Eclipse was completely passive. That's sort of what makes it feel kind of meh right now. The base of it is definitely better, just by default, if you're a good player, if you enjoy the complexity of your spec, considering how streamlined Balanced Druid was. This is good. Putting Eclipse on a cooldown is fine. But you also need to up the payoffs of your Eclipse. You need to up the payoff, up some of these buffs, you know, up some of these Balance of All Things buff, for example, or the haste buff you get in Keeper of the Grove, or perhaps do something more with the new talent, Total Eclipse. Entering any Eclipse has a 1 in 5 chance to give you both Eclipses, so basically give you CA minus the haste, just the double Eclipse of nature and arcane damage at the same time, which is very good, of course, because these buttons do astral damage, which is both arcane and nature at the same time, and they benefit from both damage increases at the same time. So this is very good, but it's RNG, it's 1 in 5, you can't plan for it, right? It's completely random. It should be something better, it should do something more, for example, or maybe give you a better payoff in what they tried to do with this. When you exit Eclipse with less than 40 astral power, your Wrath and Starfare's cast are reduced. The payoff is not big enough, you know, getting a generator to be 25% faster only until you re-enter Eclipse is not that good. When your generators do very little damage, they won't do much in your rotation in single target in terms of damage done. So this doesn't feel very good for being a last bracket talent. Like, it just misses the extra oomph of making you feel like you're doing something, like it's getting to have a big payoff, or you can feel that you played your Eclipse correctly. It doesn't feel like it's there for balance, but the infrastructure, the skeleton of the improvement is there. Removing dots, scaling with your mastery, plus turning Eclipse into an active button that you can use, plus smoothing out a few things in your talents like the right side for your AoE, removing all of the Umbral, Embrace, Inspiration, Astral Smolder, Cycle of Damage. Those are all nice positive additions, but it's just missing an extra. That's it, the extra is missing. So for now, the base is good. The final rating, given our Shadow Priest was a 3 and our Affliction Warlock was an 8.5, this one is a 7 out of 10 in the beta so far. It's just missing some extra slight improvements centered around the value of your Eclipse. Value which is in your Apex talents, but first, activating the Eclipse makes your next generator instant. This is not that good. Doesn't feel that powerful. It's not that great. 20% damage increase to your spenders in your first 3 is good, because your first 3 are the ones you generally spam as soon as you enter Eclipse to benefit also from Balance of All Things. The first 3 are also the ones you use for Star-Lord to get yourself some haste. It feels okay, but you won't feel it for starters in your rotation. And also with how much longer the cooldown between Eclipses is going to be, you will get into Eclipse less than right now in live. This one is whatever. It's essentially Astral Smolder, sort of. Astral Smolder Light. It's an extra dot on the enemy. This is the one that should give you the extra oomph. Activating an Eclipse also launches extra damage. If you are in Solar Eclipse, it's a single target nuke. It's about the damage of a Star Surge, more or less. And then if you activate Eclipse in Lunar, it's AoE. It's an AoE splash of damage. Again, even with this help, even with this extra help of the Eclipse, it still feels like it's too weak. Plus, it would only be at the start of your Eclipse. You know, Eclipse lasts for 15 seconds, doing the extra damage when you click it, when you activate it. It's almost even something you would want by default on your Eclipse, and not something special like an Apex talent. So being tacked onto the Apex talents is still decent. It still gives you extra burst damage immediately as you activate Eclipse, but it still feels like it's missing something. So that's our state right now for balance. Definitely not in a mechanically broken, philosophically broken state like Shadow Priest, for example, but it just needs a little bit extra for the spec centered around the ender, the finisher inside of your Eclipse to feel good at all. So with this said and done with on this Saturday is what we had to talk about for today. And with this cleared, we can leave each other to the rest of our weekend. We can start our goodbyes, of course, by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting Competitive for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow. And in the meantime, I really just don't like 3s, man. This old Keeper of the Grove 3 and thing has gotta go. Has got to go.